Okay, well, good evening and welcome everyone to the MHCH Housing Justice Educational Forum, State Housing and Homelessness Bills. We have with us today Joe Coletti from the Hub for Urban Initiatives and Miha Risden from a Community of Friends. They will talk about housing and homelessness bills that are currently going through the state legislature. Both those we need to keep an eye out for and those that we want to support. But before we get to their presentations, I'm going to do a brief inspirational reflection and our team reports, what's happening at MHCH. So since we are talking about legislation, which is often a long and complicated process, I thought I'd share 3 quotes from Martin Luther King about legislation, providing for people's needs, and perseverance. So for that, I'm going to share my screen because I want you all to see the quotes. Let's see. Okay, so the first one, Martin Luther King said, while the law may not change people's hearts, it does change people's habits. And when you change people's habits, pretty soon the attitudes and the hearts will be changed. So there is a need for a strong legislation constantly to grapple with the problems that we face, and the emphasis on constantly. He also said, why should there be hunger and deprivation in any land, in any city, at any table, when we have the resources and the scientific know-how to provide everyone with the basic necessities of life? There is no deficit in human resources. The deficit is in human will. And then finally, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight, is the continuous struggle of constantly passing legislation so that we can move to being a society of justice and compassion. So I want to start with what's happening at MHCH, Making Housing and Community Happen. These are our team reports. We are a small organization. We have a small staff, just 4 paid staff, and then Anthony and Jill are full-time volunteers. We have a ton of other volunteers, from everybody who serves on the teams to those who write emails or to testify at meetings. So we have 4 different teams, and that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. So our safe parking team. So there are about 15,000 people living in their vehicles in Los Angeles County, but until recently, there was no safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley. But almost 2 years ago, on April 1st, 2021, we launched the first safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley in partnership with Foothill Unity Center and Trinity Lutheran Church, which hosts the site. So this first program provides 5 safe places to park, access to a bathroom in the church building, case management services provided by Foothill Unity Center. We've been able to get some vehicle repair assistance for some of the parkers. Mental health treatment is provided, and we get referrals to job placement and permanent housing. 2 people have been permanently housed in the program so far. We have goals, and the first goal is to get all of our current parkers housed. We have 5. Our program is full. We have 5 parkers. We want to get them all housed in the next year. We want to make our program legal. Our program is actually technically not legal. We had to start this under the radar because Pasadena didn't allow this. Now they know about it. It's an open secret, but we want to get it legal. We want to expand to 1 more San Gabriel Valley site. We need to write about 3 grants this year because these programs take money. If you want to volunteer with the committee, contact Wendy McGrail. You can contact her through email, Wendy B. McGrail, McGrail @gmail.com. That's if you want to volunteer on the committee. And excuse me, for some reason it stopped working. I'm gonna have to start over again. I think I know what happened. Okay, no, that's not what happened. Share, okay. All right, sorry about that. From currents from beginning. Okay. All right. Can someone tell me what you see on the screen?
Wendy McRae.
Okay, that's Wendy. Okay. So if you want to make a referral to the safe parking program, then contact Myra Bueno. You can contact her through email, Myra at foothillunitycenter.org. Myra is spelled M-A-I-R-A at foothillunitycenter.org, or you can call her at 626-358-3486, 626-358-3486. That's if you know somebody who's living in their vehicle and you want to make a referral. Next is our congregational land team. And this team consults with congregations to build affordable housing. So they're a team of experts. We have a city planner, we have affordable housing experts and other experts who consult with churches. They can do feasibility studies. So they work with a church to do a feasibility study to show what is feasible on that property. They can help write the request for proposal, and they can help interview developers. So they do what's called, we're calling pre-development. It's the work that nobody else does to guide churches through the process and other faith communities through the process. So there are 70 congregations in Southern California that have shown interest. We are our team is in conversation with 35 of them. 12 of them have completed prep sessions. We call them cohorts. These are a series of 4 classes they have to complete. 12 of them have completed those classes. And then one congregation in Laguna Beach has completed the whole process. They have a developer plan. They're going forward with affordable housing. And there hasn't been, I'm told there hasn't been any affordable housing built in Laguna Beach in 15 years. So this will be the first affordable housing in that city in a long time. The goals for this team are to have 500 units planned on religious properties this year. And also to launch teams outside of Southern California. So there are people in Oregon, Washington State, Denver, Texas, and Northern California who are interested in what we're doing and want our team to help launch theirs. In fact, some of them are coming to Pasadena this spring to kind of launch the apprenticeship program. Now, one of the things we find a lot is that a lot of church sites, a lot of religious sites are not zoned appropriately for affordable housing. So we are trying to rezone whole jurisdictions, because if we go site by site, it adds years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to each site. And actually, a lot of developers won't even look at a site if it's not zoned appropriately. So we're doing religious overlay zones across whole jurisdictions. This first happened in Seattle. Seattle was able to do that. The Black churches led the way there. And a lot of the churches are rezoned for affordable housing there. So we're starting to do it in California. The first city to do it in California is Sierra Madre, that little sleepy bucolic town next to Pasadena. And that one was pretty easy. We met with their staff. We met with some of the clergy, and they hired Phil Burns, who's the chair of our congregational land team, to write their overlay zone. So that one went pretty smoothly. We did a 2.5-year campaign in Pasadena for an overlay zone, and we had very, very limited success. There were already 6 churches that are zoned appropriately. We only were able to add 4 more, and there's upwards of 100 church sites here. So we may revisit that. But we have been able to get it into the housing elements of a number of other Southern California cities. We're also working at a state level to get rezoning of church land, of religious land across the state. And this is the third go around for that. This iteration is called SB4, and one of our presenters will talk about that later. Our next team, Affordable and Supportive Housing Advocates, or ASHA. This is our main advocacy team, and a couple of their previous major victories are: one, they got 69 units at Heritage Square South. That's going to be 69 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors who've been experiencing homelessness. And this is an artist rendering of what it will look like. It's being built right now at the corner of Orange Grove and Fair Oaks. If you drive by there, you will see it being built. It will be done by the end of the year. This team also got 106 units approved in the Civic Center. They're going to be senior affordable units, 10% of them for seniors who've been experiencing homelessness. Seniors, by the way, are the fastest growing segment of our homeless population. So this team also worked on our religious overlay zone for Pasadena. They joined with a larger coalition to get rent control passed last year and is now in effect in Pasadena. And recently we got hybrid meetings at City Council. During pandemic, the city was only allowing public testimony through Zoom. And then when that ended, they only allowed it in person. We said, why not hybrid? And at first they were very resistant, but then it turned around and we were able to get hybrid meetings where they're now happening, not just at City Council, but at every City Council committee meeting, at the Planning Commission, at the Design Commission, and the Police Oversight Commission. All of those are hybrid meetings. So we greatly increased democracy here in Pasadena. Some of the goals for this committee are to work on SB4, which we'll talk about later. One of our presenters, Will and Miha, will talk about that. Also, we're going to revisit the religious overlay zone, but include other nonprofit institutions. So the Pasadena Institutional Overlay is what we're calling it. We're also looking at a transfer tax. This is a tax on very expensive homes when they sell, when they transfer ownership. That's why it's called the transfer tax. And this money will bring in money. This will bring in money for affordable housing. And now it doesn't sound like it would bring in that much, but Los Angeles and Culver City have done it. And Los Angeles is estimating they may bring in upwards of $1 billion a year for affordable housing. So we won't get that much, but we will get into tens of millions. And that will be for us a game changer. So transfer tax, we're also looking at school land. There's a number of schools that have closed in Pasadena over the last 15 years. And we're looking at affordable housing on that. North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team. This is a group of Black and Latino churches on Fair Oaks, north of Washington in Pasadena, who want to beautify and not gentrify that part of the city. They want to do it through better signage, more trees, sidewalk repairs, and affordable housing. Some of the churches are interested in affordable housing on their land. They also want to do it through complete streets, which is a street redesign to make the streets usable not just by cars, but also by cyclists, pedestrians, and people using other modes of transportation. Some of their goals are to write 5 grants through the city for the Complete Streets program, to create a specific plan for Fair Oaks north of Washington. A specific plan is a plan that the city does in various parts of the city, and they want one for that area specifically that will help them reach some of their goals. They also want to get more youth involvement. So we have a congregational network of more than 20 congregations that participate in MHCH. In fact, last year, 29 congregations participated in our work in one way or another here in Pasadena. In one campaign, about 170 people spent 400 hours advocating. And that was for the religious overlay zone. That's about 100 people that wrote emails and about 70 people that attended and testified at 3 planning commission meetings and 1 city council meeting. So we estimate that was about 400 hours between all the email writing and the testifying and sitting in the meeting. So if you want to be part of this, if you want your congregation to be part of the network, contact me. My name is Bert Newton. You can contact me by email, bert@makinghousinghappen.org, or you can text or call me at 626-993-7958, 626-993-7958. We also are doing one-day housing institutes. These are focused on cities, but they're done by the faith communities. So these housing institutes equip congregations, community leaders, and neighbors with practical tools needed to end homelessness and to stabilize the cost of housing through education, advocacy, and organizing. The day provides an overview of our housing stories, God's story, the story of affordable housing in the U.S. for the last 100 years, factors that have caused today's crisis, and what we have learned that works. And if you are interested in having a Housing Justice Institute in your city, contact Lucero Garcia, Lucero, Lucero, at makinghousinghappen.org. So that ends our team reports. So now we are going to go on to the main part of our program, the 2 presentations by Joe and Miha. And I want to first tell you about Joe Coletti. Joe is the CEO of the Hub for Urban Initiatives and affiliate associate professor of urban studies at Fuller Theological Seminary here in Pasadena, and the co-founder of the seminary's Center for Urban Initiatives. He is also an appointed member of an advisory committee to the legislatively created California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And before we get to him, Jill has a story she wants to tell.
Yeah, this shows his big heart. He was very moved when the first person in our city passed away with hypothermia on the streets. And so because of that, he helped get the Bad Weather Shelter started, and it was at the Salvation Army. And he stayed overnight with the homeless folks and got his friends, and just that says so much about how he is incredibly passionate and lives what he believes. So we're really pleased. He's also a friend, and I'm very grateful he's with us here tonight. Thank you, Joe, for joining us.
And if you have a question while he's talking, please put it in the chat. And then after he's done talking, we will take those questions. So Joe, take it away. Go ahead and share your screen. So Joe, I think you're muted. All right.
Okay, I unmuted myself, and let me make the screen a little bigger. Is it big now?
Not yet. Go ahead and hit that button from the beginning.
There we go. Now it is, right?
Yeah, now you got it.
Okay, so with that, the presentation I want to give actually has two parts to it. The first couple slides focus on an overview of the California legislative process. And so again, just in these first couple slides, I want to note by providing an overview of the California legislative process. Point number one is that new legislation begins to take shape when the legislature reconvenes. Makes sense, right? Number two, the legislature reconvened last December 5th through the 8th, and then again on January 4th, and will do so on and off through September. Next week, they're going to go on a spring recess for a couple weeks. And then later on in the summer, I think it's mid-July, they're going to take a summer recess for about a month until mid-August and so forth. Point number three here, the legislative process includes submitting bill requests to the Office of Legislative Counsel by January 20th, where bills are drafted into bill form, and then they're returned to the legislature for introduction by this year by February 17th. So number four, a record number of bills were introduced in the 2023 legislative session. It's a record number of bills. You may have even read some of the stories, they were online and so forth. Point number five, again, the deadline to introduce bills was February 17th. And there are a total of 1,751 assembly bills, 881 Senate bills, for a total of 2,632 bills. 2,632 bills, maybe a couple, I would say a couple dozen of them concern homelessness. So with that, I just want to also note in regards to the overview of the legislative process is that it also includes all these meetings, right, that concern legislative policy and appropriations, and there's fiscal committees. Then there has to be 3 readings on both sides of the Assembly and the Senate, and they have to resolve their differences between them, the Assembly and the Senate. And then point number 7, if both houses approve a bill, it will go to the governor for approval. The last day for each house, number 8, to pass bills is September 14th. And the last day for the 2023 legislative session for the governor to approve or not approve bills is October 14th. And not all bills will be approved.
Okay, I told you I had to click the link.
So it's noting number 9, not all bills will be approved. Last year, about half of the bills were signed into law. Last year, 997 bills of approximately 2,000, about half were signed into law. And perhaps that will be the case this year as well. So again, just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the legislative process that began last December and into January, February. Here we are. It's March and the process is going on. Different bills are going to different committees, right? Community Housing and Development Committee, other fiscal committees, etc. So with that, I
Joe,
want to
that's
now,
very helpful. Yeah, thank you for that great overview. Keep going. I just wanted to say how meaningful that is that you shared that. Thanks.
okay, good. I mean, I can pause any, I was gonna do it at the end, but if there's any questions or comments about that real quick.
That you did such a great job with the overview. I wanted to compliment you now.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Joe. So with that, I want to now focus on legislation concerning homelessness. Because as noted in number 1, during the past 5 years, California has provided unprecedented funding for homelessness when compared to previous years. So beginning really in 2018, all of a sudden, when it came to homelessness, we were seeing allocations, we were seeing legislation passed that was allocating in the hundreds of thousands, then in the tens of millions, then in the hundreds of millions. And now, as I'll note in number 3, we're now seeing billions for homelessness. That's unprecedented, never has happened prior to the past 5 years. Also, as noted in number 2, the amount of legislation concerning homelessness has also been unprecedented. Number 3, legislation concerning homelessness has been dominated by HAP, the Homeless Housing Assistance Program, again, HAP, which is the largest state funding source as we speak for homelessness, $1 billion a year. There has been 4 rounds of HAP with a 5th one coming up in the fall, and rounds 1 and 2 equaled $1 billion, but round 3 was $1 billion all by itself. Round 4, another $1 billion. And when round 5 begins this coming fall, it's going to be another $1 billion on top of that. Unprecedented funding concerning homelessness. So I want to really focus on HAP, the Housing Homeless Housing Assistance Program, HAP, because there's 3 primary types of legislative bills that I want to note, and HAP, the HAP program, falls within all 3 of these primary types of legislative bills. So the first type is the one that you're most familiar with, I'm sure, Maine bills, a Maine legislative bill. Maine bills involve a legislature sending the idea for a bill to the legislative council. Remember, we talked about that by January 20th, where the legislative council then drafts it into an actual bill. Then the draft is returned to the legislature. The council says, here, legislature, here's a draft of your actual bill. Go ahead and introduce it if you want to the legislature, but you got to do it before the deadline, which again was February 17th. So that's Maine bills. Second type, intent bills. Intent bills are a little fun here because an intent bill initially includes a statement of intent by legislatures and very little other language. A common intent statement also often begins with, this bill would state the intent of the legislature to enact legislation to blah, 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 right? And that's almost standard along with the next brief statement, you know, which you'll see in a minute, that is included in an intent bill. So with that, the third type of bill is what's called a trailer bill, which focuses on implementing the language, it provides the language, and thus the implementation language of, you know, the budget bills. There's generally a assembly budget bill and a Senate budget bill. And if we were to bring both of those bills up right now and looked at them as to where they're at, you're going to say they're almost identical. And the answer is yes, that's the intent, for them to be identical, because when they go to the full legislature and ultimately to the governor for approval by June 30th, both the Assembly and the House want to have these budget bills pretty much the same, pretty much saying the same thing. And again, trailer bills is the implementation language of these state budget bills. The trailer bills provide policy details that follow the main budget bill and details measures that direct how to actually spend the funding, So again, what I said before, I wanted to focus on HAP, the Homeless Housing Assistance Program, those bills, that legislation, because it's been introduced this year, both as a main bill, an intent bill, and a trailer bill, which I found to be very unusual. Thus, HAP legislation is the main focus of my presentation going forward now. So in terms of a main bill concerning HAP, there's actually a few main bills concerning HAP. Again, this is the standard one, AB 284, which would require an evaluation of the HAP program. AB 799 would provide ongoing grant funds to support regional coordination and local capacity to address homelessness challenges, informed by best practices and to solve homelessness using evidence-based, I would have added, promising and emergency practices, but evidence-based is important, best practices, but there's also emerging practices and promising practices. Where no evidence exists, a data-informed and promising framework. You know that each of the bills are in bold and blue and underlined. That's because they're hyperlinks, as you probably figured out. And right, Bert, Jill, Anthony, when I send you this, I already sent you the PowerPoint. If you're going to put the PowerPoint out there, everybody will get it in a PDF format, but these will be links. You'll be able to link on different things as well. And so the third main bill concerning HAP is AB 1377, which would require data and a narrative summary of specific and quantifiable steps that the applicant has taken, and if the applicant has not made significant progress toward their outcome goals, the applicant shall submit a description of barriers and possible solutions to those barriers. This language in each of these bills, but in particularly AB 1377, is pretty serious language, because you may know that last November, what the governor did in terms of HAP 3, you remember I said that there's 5 HAP rounds, the 5th one coming up in the fall. Last fall, the 3rd round went out, and the governor said, stop the presses, stop everything, because staff is looking at what the outcomes is going to be of that first $1 billion in HAP funds, let alone the billion that made up rounds 1 and 2. And he was not satisfied. And he said to everybody, we're going to have a meeting in Sacramento in a few weeks. This was the beginning of November. Towards the end of November, the meeting took place. And he said, I'm not releasing the money until you guys revise your plans and submit those plans, which everybody did. And then thus the money was released. But this whole idea about the applicant shall submit a description of barriers and possible solutions is being taken very serious, because if you can't produce, your money will be reallocated, perhaps, if you don't get the kind of results that everybody's hoping for. So with that, I mentioned that HAP falls under all three of the primary bills, the second one being an intent bill. And again, I mentioned before that intent bills include a statement of intent by legislatures and very little other language. So what you see in front of you, AB 1656, homelessness funding, and you see these two little statements, that's the whole bill. That's it. You remember I said that it's standard to begin your first statement with existing law. That's why it's in bold. Exists various programs to prevent and blah, blah, blah. The Homeless Youth Act and the HAP program. And you see this, the last little statement there, the second statement at the bottom. This bill would state the intent of the legislature to enact subsequent legislation to ... That's a standard statement. That goes into an intent bill, and that's it. That's the whole language. And the reason why it's a standard practice to have two statements like this, because you need to get it in by February 17th, because that's the deadline to introduce legislation. And there's no time to actually, work on what the bill is actually going to include. But you get it in by the deadline of February 17th with this limited language, and now it can go forward, and it is going forward. This bill is being introduced to the next committee, which is Housing and Community Development, and they're beginning to shape the language. And by the time this bill is finished, there'll probably be a couple pages of language, several paragraphs and so forth. But it's all being done now because there wasn't time to do it prior to February 17th. So with that, the third type of bill is a trailer bill. And so HAP, also, there's a HAP trailer bill. Again, a trailer bill is the budget implementing language. And this is implementing language, the trailer bill for round 5, which again, I mentioned is going another $1 billion that will be made available this coming fall. So a trailer bill is the implementation language of a budget bill. You remember I was saying that? So this is a good example. You got a trailer bill provides the language for a budget bill. So the language here is that the program, the HAP program, shall be $1 billion. It's going to go to cities, counties, and continuums of care and tribes. And here's the language: 30% of the billion of the funds will be available to continuums of care. 42% of the funds for each city with a population of 300,000 or more as of January 1st, 2022. There's 13 such cities with a population of over 300,000 in the state of California. 42% to those cities. 28% of the funds will go to counties and 2% to tribal applicants. So again, that's the kind of budget language. That's what a trailer bill does. It provides that kind of information. And again, the focus here is HAP because that's the largest pot of homelessness funding. Again, $1 billion. So with that, I want to continue on, with focusing on legislation concerning homelessness. And by going on, what I want to note is that the next, as noted in number 1, the next legislative steps also include proposed budgeted funding. So if we go back to that timeline that I said before, the legislative season began in December 5th through 8th, the 2023 legislative session. Then it picked up January 4th. And then there was the Office of Legislature had to get everything to them by January 20th, and everything had to be introduced by February 17th. And then now there's all these committee meetings going forward and so on. And then remember I talked about how that as it goes forward, the whole legislative process, that the whole budget has to be adopted, by by June 30th, and the legislator has to do their things. But so in the middle of this timeline, from December 5th through June 30th, there is what's called proposed budgeted funding. What that means is this. Number two, every year the governor and the legislature adopt a state budget that provides a framework and funding for critical public services and systems that include housing and homelessness. What you're going to hear soon is all the housing bills, and there's a ton of those out there. Number three here on this slide, the Constitution requires the government to submit a proposed budget by January 10th, every year, by January 10th. So the proposed budget, which includes a detailed overview of the governor's proposed expenditures to the legislature for review again by January 10th, right? And this includes all the proposed budgeted funding for both housing and homelessness, again, by January 10th. Then, while the proposed budget number 4 will move through the legislature's budget committees, again, trailer bills will be needed to implement the policies assumed in the budget, which again includes HAT. So the second thing that the governor has to do concerning proposed budgeted funding is also to submit what's called the May revision. This is done every year. So again, the budget January 10th, the May revision, which has to be, as noted in number 6, the governor will release the May revision budgeted funding on or before May 14th. Okay, that's an updated budget that adjusts the proposed expenditures, withdraws anything that was included in the governor's proposed budgeted in January, that again had to be submitted by January 10th. Then a couple other points. Number 7, the legislature must pass a balanced budget by midnight, on June 15th for the upcoming fiscal year that begins July 1st. Then the governor may sign the budget bill and budget related bills by July 1st. Actually, he better sign them by July 1st. Number 9, budget details will remain to be finalized, and additional budget related bills will likely be acted upon during the summer, including bills about homelessness. So it just doesn't all stop come June 30th or July 1st. So I just want to wind up by doing a couple more quick things. One is that there are other legislative bills concerning homelessness, again, that were introduced by February 17th. One of them is AB 271, Homeless Death Review Committees. And yet, Jill, going back to what you said, back when, when seeing people that were dying on the streets, not only of Pasadena, but in LA County, this goes back to the late 80s, the early 90s, is very disconcerting to say the least. And this homelessness death review committees, this bill would authorize counties to establish a homeless death review committee. And I cannot tell you how happy that has made me and others that I know to see this, as we were pushing it through, not just through legislation, but pushing it through the state action plan. Even the state action plan now has been amended and updated, I should say, to include mortality prevention. And the California Department of Public Health has been assigned to actually collect the data from coroner's offices. And we've been talking about LA County, and I can tell you, every year we get urban initiatives, we get the coroner's office data from the coroner's office concerning those persons who died while homeless. And if you didn't know, you will now know that in LA County every day, about 5 people die homeless every day that are brought to the coroner's office. More than 5 people die per day, but 5 of them are brought to the coroner's office. And when I look at the data, and it breaks it out by age. And at one time I was Senator Portantino and his staff, and they put me on the call with the head chief, whatever medical person of the LA County Coroner's Office. And I said, I get the ages, but what's this 0? It says age 0. What does that mean? The guy said, an infant or a fetus that was viable, meaning the mother's in her 3rd trimester. And so we count them. And there was 43 of them, age 0. So this homeless death review committees hopefully will provide the kind of data that we can do homeless prevention. I know I'm sidetracking a little, but this is very dear to my heart because I just think that we can take the data and we could even probably do some predictive analysis. If we look at past data and say, you know what, according to this data, under the viaduct on the corner, under the freeway overpass, underneath the overpass, every year there's a half a dozen people, I'm making a number up, that die there. And 6 more are going to die there this year. So how about we do something about it? Let's get our outreach team over there and see if we can prevent people from dying. Another piece of legislation is SB 20, the Joint Powers Agreement for Regional Housing Trust. You're familiar with this because this helped the prior legislation. You remember the Joint Exercise of Powers Act, back in 2020, that created the the San Gabriel Valley Housing Trust, San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust. I always forget the one word. And then there's a similar one in Orange County. This bill is going to encourage the creation of regional housing trusts, for the purposes of assisting the homeless population, everything that you could read there, governed by a board of directors consisting of a minimum of 9 directors. And then there's SB 63, the Homeless and Mental Health Court and Transitioning Home Grant. I wanted to mention that as well, because that would establish 2 new grant programs, a Homeless and Mental Health Court Grant Program and another one called the Transitioning Home Grant Program. So that would create those 2 pieces of legislation. So my last couple slides here. If you want to learn more in or support legislation, including HAP, you can go to these websites or pages. And again, these are hyperlinks. Once they're distributed to you, you can just go ahead and click on them and go directly to these websites, or some of them are websites, others are just web pages. And in my last slide, just to, you want to learn about other introduced legislation concerning homelessness. These are 4 reports that we Urban Initiatives put together. They're all 4 our reports. The first one goes back to December 5th. The next one, shows the legislation going forward, something more about intent bills, budget bills. So again, these are also hyperlinks as well. So I will stop there. And I can stop sharing, Bert, and just open it up, right?
Yeah. Thanks so much. That's a lot of information. And I think I understand. I actually read through the PowerPoint when you sent it. I understand it better now that you went through it. But it's pretty complicated process. And you provided a lot of links. So Paige put in a question here. She says, what can you tell us about the parties who are lobbying against some or all of these bills?
You mean the Democratic or the Republican parties? That's what I mean. The 2
Or
parties?
any group, I think, any entities, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, on the Democratic and the public, actually on the Republican side, is that in the state of California, when a Republican introduces a bill, that Republican legislator knows that the chances are much less of it being approved than if you are a Democrat, but some of the parties, I mean, Jill and Anthony, you mentioned about California, Housing California, you're there. I mean, they're one of the biggest parties, you know, especially not just on housing, but in homelessness as well. And you go to their website page and, you know, you can see what they support and what they don't sometimes. And they have these meetings once a month that you could actually ever join, that you could join if you wanted. And then Corporation for Supportive Housing is another organization that gets behind legislation and supporting and not supporting certain. So those are the ones that come to mind. Paige, okay.
Does that answer your
Sure.
question? Mhm. Okay.
Well, I mean, sure. I'm just sort of thinking about SB4 and the work that's being done to convince the trades to come alongside, and
Oh.
thinking about lobbying energy and convincing energy. What are the current arguments, and who's trying to be convinced of what at this point?
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, and we'll Miha's going to get into SB4. So yeah, but those are things we always wonder about. It's a kind of a mystery to us how that happens. Arita asks, what is the process for the governor to declare an emergency? Why isn't homelessness declared an emergency?
And if the governor got on our call right now, he would be saying, I have declared it an emergency. Though in the same breath, he would say, okay, I know that in the last couple months or so, it's been done a little bit more formally than me. So like Mayor Bass in this city of Los Angeles, declared a public homelessness a public emergency, and that's kind of been the model now, and others have followed it. Yeah, and the governor hasn't quite followed that. We'll see if he does, but he's been, I mean, he pushes on homelessness. I mentioned before, I mean, he even froze HAP 3 funds. Everybody knew he was not a happy governor, when saying, all right, folks, I'm not releasing this $1 billion. Be there 2 weeks from now on a Friday in Sacramento at the whatever, I wasn't there, but the center was there, and and we need to talk about this.
Any other questions? We can move on for the sake of time so that Miha can do her presentation. You might think of other questions for Joe. Okay, Adrian. Hi, Adrian. I didn't even know you were here. So Adrian says, can you please share more about the homeless pregnant population?
Yeah, in some ways, I wish there wasn't anything in the share, but yeah, I mean, I mean, other than that data that I said, I can't remember out of the 43 zero ages, how many were viable fetus and how many were actually infants. But, out there, I don't know.
Just the knowledge that there are pregnant women who are dying on the street. I mean, that's what that means, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I know there was a story about a woman who was pregnant in Skid Row, LA. I just read it, just a few days ago, or was it about a week ago? She was murdered.
Wow.
I'll tell you what, though, I'll throw someone in for the Downtown Women's Center. Look them up,
Yeah.
the Downtown Women's Center.
They're fabulous.
And if you go there, yeah, good. Someone said they're fabulous. Yeah, and Amy Turk, who's the director there, she's the best. And if you ever sent her or somebody an email or just tried to reach out to them, or even email me, my spouse, she's very involved with the Downtown Women's Center. She's very involved in legislation. She can say a lot more about pregnant women who are homeless. She just completed an assessment of 600 women who were homeless in LA County, which will be released in July. So taking up more and more time here. So
Yeah, let's move on to with Miha. And Miha, we don't have a personal story about you, but I do have your bio here. Miha Risden is the director of housing at a community of friends. Some people know that as ACOF, 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 doing multifamily housing development. For 20 years, Ms. Risden worked for other affordable housing developers and worked as a senior loan officer for affordable housing. So, now, if you have questions while she's talking, you can put them in the chat, and then we'll open it up for questions again after she's done. So Miha, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Okay. Can you, ooh. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we
Or
can
the
see it.
slides? Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, so community of friends, but I'm here tonight. Uh-oh.
So Miha, you need to make it so we can see the full screen. So just put from the beginning. And
I did that already. I think
mm,
Do you
yeah,
think
we only see a partial. Yeah, there you go. That's great. Perfect.
yeah. I think the connection was a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're kind of going in and out a little bit. Did we lose her? What happened?
Sorry, I think the
Oh.
connection was a little bit unstable.
Okay.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, sorry. I had done that, but it wasn't showing it on your end. I think it wasn't going through. Okay, so I'm here tonight as a board member of SCAMF, which is the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. And so even though I work for Community of Friends, I'm here as a member of the board to share with you some information around some bills that SCAMF is supporting and watching, and to share with you, potential action steps that you might be able to take and to support this legislation. Okay. Did my thing freeze again? Oh, okay. So before launching into the regulations themselves, I did want to share a little bit about kind of SCAMF and the kinds of policies, a little bit framework of the kinds of policies that we support or what we think through. One of SCAMF's policy priorities is power building. And so as an organization, we do try to work with government officials, different agencies, community organizations, and different groups to build support for the development of affordable housing and a wide variety, including supportive housing. We do have a strong commitment to the tenants or residents of affordable housing, and having their input and voices heard as we think through policy. And we're trying to expand funding available for affordable housing production. And it's really important that I think we try to focus on funding that is predictable, because that really enables developers to create a steady stream or kind of create a pipeline of affordable housing development if the funding is, the timing and the amounts are predictable, also sustainable. So that's something that hopefully will last for a long period of time, so that developers can count on that money being there, rather than like, a 1 or 2 or 3 year source of funding. And we're looking to support funding that helps, that provides money for capital, which is the construction of the housing, operations, which is for usually rental subsidies or operating subsidies once the building is complete, and then supportive services, which will help fund the services for the tenants in affordable and supportive housing. And again, kind of hopefully for long term. And then we also try to forge partnerships and with housing and services and community integration. So that's kind of the framework. I feel like there's a lag when I try to change the slide. Okay, there we go. Okay, so these are the bills that I'm going to cover, and we'll go in one by one. So there's 4 bills that SCAM supports, one that we're asking you to kind of watch, and then there has been mention of SB4, and there's some information about that we'll talk about at the end. So a bill to watch is Senate Bill 423, which is extending a bill that was approved in the past called SB 35, and it's expiring. So it's expiring on January 21st, 2026. And so to give you a little bit of background, I don't know how familiar you are with RHNA, which is kind of an assessment of how many housing units or low and affordable housing units are needed in each city. But there's an assessment done, and they're given kind of, you call it like a RHNA score or RHNA number. And cities are supposed to plan for the production of that number of units to meet the housing need. And in the past, there wasn't really any teeth to it. I mean, there kind of was, but not a lot of enforcement. So what SB 35 does is that it basically says if a city has not met its RHNA goal, the production goal, then projects that include a certain amount of affordable housing can be approved or should be approved in a ministerial process. So that means it's not like subject to a public hearing. It's more an administrative process done by staff. So it's not really a subjective approval, but it's an approval that, you know, if the project meets certain criteria, then it must be approved. And so what it does is it increases affordable housing production because it creates more certainty, and you know, it's fewer projects are subject to people's opinion about whether it should be approved or not. And it has very strict timelines around how much time a jurisdiction has to review the application and determine if a project meets the criteria for SB 35. So it's between 60 and 90 days, and then it gives them 90 to 180 days to approve the project if it is eligible. And the shorter time, kind of the shorter time frame is if you're 150 units or fewer, and then if you're more, you're the longer time frame. And if the city doesn't meet those requirements, then it's deemed approved. So, you know, it's a pretty powerful tool for jurisdictions that haven't met RHNA, and that's the vast majority of cities. I've used it twice, and it is very effective in getting projects approved. And I think another really important part of this SB 35 is that jurisdictions cannot add subjective requirements to approve the project. So it has to be like very clear criteria, very kind of something that applies to all projects. So they can't come up with something new out of the blue to say, hey, if you're an affordable housing project, now you need to do X, Y, and Z, if it's not something that in writing by regulation is already required of all projects. So it's a pretty powerful tool in that way too. So SB 423 is really to extend SB 35 and make it permanent instead of something that has an expiration date on it. And then another component is that it requires payment of prevailing wage, which is equivalent to kind of union wages if you're more than 10 units. And then if you're more than 50 units, then you have to have if your project's in a region with certain population, then you have to have apprentices when you're in construction. or the contractor has to hire apprentices, so that's from the unions, and pay for healthcare. And then the previous version of it exempted coastal zones from being subject to SB 35, but that exemption goes away under SB 423. So this slide, which you'll get copies of this, just has information about who introduced it. It's been passed and referred to committee on the Government and Finance Committee, but it's not scheduled yet. So what you could do to support it is just to keep an eye. When you get the slide, there's a bill tracker that you can link. You can press the link on, and then just keep an eye on it for now. And then, you know, once it's scheduled, you can express support for it. Do you want me to take questions at the end, Jill? Or okay. Okay, so bills to support. These are bills that SCAMP has officially, the board has officially decided to support. And so one is Senate Bill 225, the Community Anti-Displacement and Preservation Program. So this is actually a bill that, you know, a lot of people refer to them as NOAA, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. So this is a bill that provides financing to acquire and preserve housing that just, it's market rate housing in the sense that it's already there, but it is occupied by people who are of low income, and it preserves, it enables kind of mission-minded organizations to purchase these buildings and keep them affordable, so that they don't get bought up and, you know, people get kicked out and converted into like what we would consider truly market rate housing, right, where they're charging much higher rents. Oops. So sorry, this one I kind of, okay, I forgot to advance it. So provide short-term acquisition, so money to buy the building, and then subsidies, so it helps keep the rent low and affordable to people who are of low income. And it's a good anti-gentrification tool. And here too, it's been passed and referred to committee, but it's not scheduled yet. So that's kind of the status of where this this bill is. You can submit letters to the offices of the senator, or you can email Frank. At the very last slide has his email address, so you can get it from there. You can call the district offices, and you can also call the government organization committee when it's scheduled. Okay. And then this slide tells you kind of how to use this portal. You can use this when you, as a reference when you get the slides. Okay, so Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1. The key here, so I'll go to so the problem is that we need more housing. There's a $1 million shortfall in rental homes that are affordable to low and very low income households. There's also infrastructure in California that needs some fundraising. And right now, these types of funds can be raised through general obligation bonds that are local. But right now it requires 2/3 vote support for these bills to pass. And that's a pretty high threshold. So it requires a lot of campaign money, you know, and it's some bills aren't even brought forth because they don't think they can hit that 2/3 mark. And so what this bill is proposing is, oh, and the other thing I'll say is it's written in the state constitution. So this is a way for local governments to raise money for affordable housing and infrastructure. But because the state constitution says that the minimum requirement is 2/3 vote, the local governments can't, right? They can't they can't raise money through general obligations bond until they have that much support for that bill. So this bill is basically to change the state constitution to lower that threshold to 55% instead of the 2/3, to make it easier for bills to pass at the local level with a little bit over majority of the vote. And if this bill, if this bill passes, why am I going forwards? If it passes, then it'll be on the statewide, like it'll show up in your November ballot for the whole state to vote on it. Okay, and then the action items are the same as before. Email Frank for a support letter, sample support letter, call the district offices, and call the committees once it's scheduled. Assembly Bill 346. I don't know how much you know about the low-income housing tax credit program, but it is one of the main funding sources for affordable housing, and it makes up almost every traditionally financed affordable housing project has low-income housing tax credits in the project, and it makes up a significant portion of the sources for affordable housing projects. But for some background, there's two kinds of tax credits. One is a 9% and one is a 4%. It's very technical, but what I will say is you usually get more money from a 9% because it's a bigger number. So you get 9% of the credits and you get less money from the 4%. And, back in the day, or still today, 9% credits were very competitive. There's always more projects applying for 9% credits than there is money, and there's a very limited amount of credits every year. So it was creating kind of like a backlog of projects that were otherwise ready to go, but they didn't, but they couldn't get the 9% credits. The 4% credits is also another funding source, which is unlimited, but you have to pair this with bonds, but the bonds are limited. So for a while, because 4% credits gives you less money, projects often had a funding gap with just 4% credits, and so often there was not enough projects applied for 4% credits to use up all the credits. So in a way, money was being left on the table. It's like a financing resource that is available for affordable housing, but the money was being left on the table because people couldn't make the numbers work. So what happened was the state decided to supplement money available for projects with 4% credits with state credits to try to help fill that funding gap. I know this is very complicated, okay? But just to kind of shorten the story, the problem is that there's more to it, but not all this extra state credits that were being offered to help make 4% deals work were being utilized. And it has to do with a lot of technical things, but it was kind of like, the state had made this resource available, and just because of some structural things, not all the state credits were able to be used. So this bill is basically giving the state authority to take these state credits and allocate them to either the 4% program or the 9% program, depending on if the 4% program doesn't use all the credits, they could move it to the 9% program and fund more projects. So allowing the state to be able to move these state credits from one program to the other enables more projects to get funded, is basically the goal of this bill. And so big picture wise, that's why SCAM supports it. Because at the end of the day, we don't care, right? Did you fund it with 4% or 9%? It's, are we really maximizing the funding sources that are available for affordable housing? And are we taking that money and building as many units as we can? And this is a tool to help developers do that, and for the state to use the resources they have to fund as many units as they can. Okay, so it's been referred to the Housing, Community Development, and Revenue and Taxation Committees. It's not scheduled, but the action items are the same, except we added California Housing Partnership. They have a sample letter too that you can use. And then Assembly Bill 1657, this is the Affordable Housing Bond Act. There's really not a lot of detail available. They haven't established how much money they want to raise through this bill, but essentially it's a bill to allow bonds that will fund affordable housing, rental affordable housing, and homeownership programs. So more information to come on that, but because it is expanding the pie of money available to develop affordable housing, it is a bill that SCAM supports, and we would like you to support as well. Okay, and then this is Senate Bill 4, which has been brought up a few times. Some of you may already be, I think sounds like are already familiar with it, but essentially the issue was that faith-based organizations, which often own lands, were interested in using a portion of their site to build affordable housing. But it was very difficult to do that because it's not usually the land that they own was not zoned for multifamily housing. And in order to change that, you know, it's usually a discretionary process, a long process, very expensive to hire all the consultants to do that kind of work. And so SB4 basically makes it by right, which means you don't have to go through a discretionary process. You don't have to change the zoning. You can, it would allow multifamily housing to be built on land owned by faith-based organizations, and not actually, it also includes nonprofit colleges to be built there without having to go through a lengthy and expensive process to get the project entitled, which is the right to approve to build your project. And it also takes out that risk that, you know, developers don't want to, or faith-based organizations may not want to take on, right? Because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So, you know, kind of what it does is, you know, it creates this by right approval process. It protects these projects from CEQA challenges. So the California Environmental Quality Act, where some people who oppose affordable housing use that to stop projects. Increases housing production because it makes more land available for housing development, and kind of takes that risk away, and it shortens the development timeline. So, you know, it could take years to change the zoning of a site to allow multifamily housing. And because it would be then by right, where it's just, it's more of an administrative process, it really shortens the timeline to be able to build the housing. It's been passed and referred to Committee on Government and Finance, but it's not scheduled yet. So the action items again are to send a support letter, call the district offices, and then to call this committee once it's scheduled. So I think if you have any questions, Frank's email is here. You can email him for, you know, sample support letter if you have other questions about these particular policies, but I can try to answer some tonight if you have any now.
So, yeah, Mia, so I think everybody can see that this gets pretty complicated. It's kind of why I had those Martin Luther King quotes at the beginning about perseverance. Because a lot of this stuff is complicated, but it's very important. One thing I wanted to ask with SB 423 that you were talking about,
Mhm.
and it sounds like it kicks in, it overrides discretionary processes and makes them ministerial when cities are not meeting their RENA targets. Is that right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if it has to wait till a city doesn't meet its RENA target, does it mean it takes 8 years for it to kick in?
No, if in that, at the point in time you have a project and they
Mhm.
haven't met the RENA goal, which is like, let's say they're short, like, the RENA says you're short 1,000 units. At that moment in time, they are short units and you can get a project approved under SB 35. Well, it will become 423 later. Yeah,
But because reason is RENA is an 8-year goal.
right.
And so if you're doing this in year 1, of course, they won't
Mhm.
have met their RENA targets yet because that's an 8-year goal.
Right.
So
You
But I
can
think
use it
you're
in year 1.
Yeah, I think they're referring to the targets of the number of units planned for the next 8 years. And if it doesn't show that you've planned for enough units, then immediately the builder's remedy or this what she's
Right.
referring to kicks in.
is that
Right.
what it
You
is?
don't wait till the end of the 8 years, right? Like if in year 1 you haven't met that goal, it's like it's like an incentive, right? Like you need to, each city, you need to hurry up and get these units in the pipeline, and get them built, because until you hit, let's say, the 1,000 unit, any project that comes that meets the criteria for SB 35, you will have to approve ministerially.
Okay. All right. So that's a little, so yeah, that's a little bit different from what Jill's saying. Jill's saying that the
Yeah.
housing
Right.
element is out of compliance.
No, right. So your housing element is in compliance if you've planned for, right, that
Mhm.
goal, let's say. But if you haven't built it, or then you haven't met that housing need.
Wow. That's just about
That's
every
huge.
city.
That's
Yes.
amazing. I've never seen a bill like that. That would be phenomenal.
Well, it's there. So this is to extend it. So one example I would say is we have a project that got built in, or is in construction now, in Ventura, the city of Ventura. And because it has both, the city has not met the RENA goal, and we were able, and it's under 150 units, we were able to get the project approved in less than 90 days, a 122 unit project.
That's amazing.
And they were not able, normally Ventura takes you through like a committee, like an architectural review process, and they ask you to, add this or change the design, all of that. SB 35 doesn't allow them to do that. It has to be something regulatory that everybody knows about, written in advance. And if it's not there, they can't make you add it. So, what we proposed, and they couldn't add extra things, and they had to kind of approve it as is because we met all the standards under the regulation. So it takes out discretionary things.
Right. And so you're saying until they're built or until they're in the pipeline or have been approved?
You know what? Let me double check if it's built or in the pipeline.
I'm wondering if we can stop share so we can all see each other.
Oh, right.
All right. Okay.
Great to see everybody again.
Okay.
And if you can't find that now, don't
Yeah,
worry.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. That would be really interesting because it doesn't seem like it's being used very much.
Not in our
I
city,
think it's
but in other cities.
not
it
in
has.
Pasadena.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we've, no.
So I've
Yeah,
used
we
it in
should.
Huntington Park and in Ventura.
Wow.
Huntington Park, their housing element was completely out of compliance.
Okay, that makes sense. Their housing element.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
Ventura, their housing element was in compliance. They just hadn't met their RENA goal.
I think so. I'm seeing it as an or, but I'm going to double check.
Okay.
That.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'd be really good to know. We could ask Bill Wong, our housing director, like, why isn't this being used more?
Yeah, I
Um,
Yeah,
think
I
it'd be
mean, yeah.
important to learn more about that and
Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
benchmarks did. When does it actually kick in? And how do they know they've met certain amounts by certain years as it goes through the 8-year process,
Yeah. I don't think it's by year. I think it's the total.
the total? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right,
maybe.
Wow.
because now,
Wow.
now I have a strategic, can you hear me? I have a strategic question. I'm in La Mirada, my church is in La Mirada. The
Mhm.
city doesn't have the space to meet its RENA goals. So they've now done a campaign and they've sent, I think, all the churches letters, like, can we include your property in the housing element? Am
Mhm.
I was thinking, well, of course, but now I'm thinking, well, if we all withhold that support, then we keep them out of compliance. So if we ever do actually want to build on that property, it becomes easier. Like strategically, I need direction here,
So in
right?
La Mirada, are you allowed to build housing, affordable housing on church-owned sites? Because SB4 hasn't passed yet.
No, what I'm saying is the city is
Right.
out of compliance, right? So to get in compliance, they're trying to compile, and they don't
Right.
have any property besides closed schools, and maybe it's all built out,
Right.
right? So they're trying to
So
figure out how-
technically, if you're going to add sites to your housing element, to identify them as sites where affordable housing can be built, it has to be land in order for it to qualify or pass, right? That one could feasibly build housing on it, multifamily housing on it. So if that land is not zoned for affordable housing or for multifamily housing, it's not really feasible to build multifamily housing on there. So the state, in reviewing their housing element, could say your housing element still doesn't comply because even the sites you identified, it's not a feasible site. Like some cities have identified like tiny little plots of land, and you're like, that's not a feasible site. Like you can't build multifamily housing there. So, they could put it on there. Whether it would be deemed compliant is questionable. If something like SB4 hasn't passed, or if they haven't approved it, or they would have to change the zoning.
Mhm. Interesting, thanks. Mhm.
So Arita asked a question I was wondering about, like if with SB 423, SB 35, that becomes SB 423, then I mean, by it seems like we wouldn't even need SB 4 because that what cities have met the arena targets, they could just build.
You do need SB4 because, right, one of the benefits of SB4 is it makes more land eligible or available to build housing. Because at the end of the day, you need a place to build it. And one of the criteria is that the land, to use SB 35 or when it becomes SB 423, is that the land has to be zoned to build multifamily. So, right, like if you have a project and let's say it was on a church-owned land and multifamily is not allowed on there, you couldn't use SB 35 as a tool because you would not be eligible because you didn't meet that criteria.
Okay, and that's why La Mirada is sending all their churches letters. Can we change your zoning, basically? So we can
Maybe,
put it in the
yeah.
housing element. And okay, got it.
Interesting. Wow.
Yes. This looks like somebody else has a question. Oh, that was Arita's question. Yeah, would it override church land zoning issue? Okay, any other questions?
Is that a ET? Is that a hand or is that?
Somebody raising a hand? I don't see one.
I don't know if it's part of the
No,
image.
that's a person with the initials ET.
Okay.
I'm wondering, Miha, about SB 225. I heard it was at first it was supposed to be $1 billion, and now it's $500 million. That's what I understood. And with that, since that's $500 million, like the average price of a home in Pasadena is over $1 million. But even if you took half of that, you're still talking about 1,000 homes that you can buy with that. That doesn't seem like a lot. Is it going to, is it, because is that like a 1,000 homes statewide or?
I think It doesn't have to be a single family home. It could be
Mhm.
an apartment building,
Mhm.
right? So, I mean, I think a lot of people, when we think of naturally occurring affordable housing, we tend to think of multifamily. I know that's just because of the space that I'm in, but we often think about like apartment buildings, some small and bigger, right? Where there are people who are of low income already living in them.
Mhm.
So, you know, I don't know what the exact amount is that's available or that's currently in the bill, but you know, considering there isn't really a source now, I think it would be helpful still to buy, you know, you could buy a good number of apartment buildings with 500 million.
Okay.
That's actually something years ago we were able to get into the housing element. They never acted on it, but the Pasadena housing element did talk about purchasing
Yeah.
naturally occurring affordable units.
Right, because it's a strategy, but somebody has to bring the money to buy it.
You have to figure out
Yeah.
how you're going to make them affordable. Yeah, it has to be somehow income qualified and kept affordable. Yeah.
So while other people are thinking of their questions, just real quick, I do want to mention AB 567, which would be statewide rent control. And it would basically, it was sort of taking AB 1482, which was the anti-rent gouging, and which has a cap of 10% and bringing it down to 5%. And then the formula, it would be CPI or inflation, the rate of inflation, or 5%, whichever is lower. So, and it will strengthen some tenant protections as well. So that's SB 567, if you want to watch that and look for that. And that's the sponsor is Durazo. She's one of the Los Angeles reps, senators, senator from Los Angeles, state senator from Los Angeles. Any other questions for Miha or for Joe? I think Joe is still here. Yeah, Joe's still here. Okay, we're going to send out the PowerPoints that they showed to everyone. They've got links in them so you can link to the information. As Miha said, you can email Frank. I don't know if Frank knew he was going to get these emails, but you can email Frank for questions.
He knows. He said to put his email on there, so
Okay.
he's expecting emails from you.
Okay, great. He's expecting email. Joe, anything you wanted to say?
No, I'm
Okay.
good.
Excellent. And
Other than a little, yay.
excellent.
Yeah.
I didn't know we had animation on the clapping hands. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Jill, did you want to say some closing words?
Sure. And I first want to say a huge thanks. I learned so much from both of you. It was very helpful. And I got a great lesson in government. I truly did not know a lot of what you shared, Joe. So that was fascinating. Thank you. So I do want to close out just by talking briefly about the balance of power and how local city council members are often elected they depend on the contributions in their communities. And so they are beholden to those people that had the money that helped to get them elected. And so they tend to be NIMBY a lot of times in our local cities because those are the folks that have given the money in order to stay in office. And that's why the state policy is important, because it helps balance what cities sometimes just aren't willing to do. So that's why we have the session on state policy, because it's that balancing act between the local and the state. Today, we're very proud of the policy. I'm just going to give you one example. Years ago, we tried like crazy to get a local ADU, accessory dwelling unit policy here in our city, and we were getting nowhere. And so we did some excellent research, but it's more of a heart issue than it was a head issue. And we just weren't making it in our city. And so we went to a state lawmaker, Senator Wachowski. We shared with him our concerns about our city. And he basically said, tell me everything your city's doing so that we can make sure we pass a bill that will prevent them from continuing to do those things. And I said, really? I was amazed. And that's exactly what he did. And so today, it kind of saves face for our local housing, our local city council. They didn't have to pass it. It was the state that did it. Now they own it. They're proud of it. And we have some of the best ADU policy around affordable ADUs in the country. We've won national awards, and they love they take credit for that. So so I think this whole balancing of what we're trying to talk about tonight, of the importance of local policy and state policy, is essential to understand. I wanted to mention briefly how brilliant I think our system is, that it was set up that way, that we can work both at the local and the state policy to try to find a way to find some real solutions here. Right now, Anthony and I are in San Diego at a conference called Housing California, and we work mostly with state solutions at this conference. So we're learning a lot. It's a great experience being here. I wish you all could be here with us. It's phenomenal. And today we went to a workshop on disabilities. I attended that. We're making sure we're going to different workshops so we can compare notes. But the reason I went is because our next Housing Justice Forum, a month from now, on the 25th of May, will be on disabilities. And how do we provide housing for those who are experiencing disabilities? So stay tuned. We'll be sending you a flyer, but make sure that you mark your calendars for a month from now on the fourth Tuesday of April, which will be the 25th. And that'll be again at 7 o'clock. But we so appreciate you guys for coming today and participating. If you have further questions, oftentimes we'll end the recording and then you can continue to have dialogue. So we appreciate you very much, especially our speakers. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to end the recording. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much to Joe and Miha for your presentations. Those are very detailed and informative. We're going to end the recording right now, and if you want to stick around, we can stick around and talk for those who want to do that.